Okay. So welcome, everyone. Please find a place to sit. As the day goes on, please make yourself comfortable. This is anew for those of you returners. This is a new seating arrangement. We're seeing how it goes. Please make yourself comfortable. Welcome to the 25th, what's the official title? Childcare and Education Researchers Roundtable. Thank you. We are very, very excited about the folks that have agreed to come share their work with us today. And we're excited to have a conversation about all of that. And I thank you all, and thank you for making the drive. Those of you coming down from Portland had a little bit longer of a drive than in years past, and people coming from the valley thought it was a nice little 10-minute drive, no big deal, from down south. So thank you for making the journey. I know some of you have other things going on, and so if you need to leave the room for a minute and come back, please do what you need to do. There is, I believe, still fruit and yogurt. I intentionally had us get stuff that you can stick in your bag or like pull for later for snacks as the day goes on, because we have a lot to cover and I want to make sure everyone's fed. You have agendas in your packets. That's going to be the rough picture of how the day goes on. And then I have some housekeeping, but first we'll do introductions and a welcome from Megan McDonald and the School Readiness Consortium.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan McDonald, and I'm the Early Childhood Core Director, Research Core Director at the Hallie Ford Center at Oregon State University, not to be confused with Megan McClelland, who is the director of the center. So I'm one of the three Megans that has an office there, so we get confused quite often. So I just wanted to say a quick welcome to everyone, and also just let the group know that there are a few things coming up in the next year that we'll be sending out. One is a whole child training that we're planning specifically around early childhood, and that's likely going to happen in June of 2020. And also last year, my colleague Shannon Lipscomb, who I know many of you know, was working closely to sort of merge some of the work that we do, including the School Readiness Consortium. And so I know there are some of those leaders in the room, like Beth Green and Catherine Pears. I saw her on the list. So I do anticipate that we'll have more information about that coming up soon too. So welcome, and we look forward to sharing more in the future.
Thank you. And also thank you to the Early Learning Division and all of you from the Early Learning Division that are here and will be coming in throughout the day. I know it's a lot of, we all have busy lives, and so thank you for being here, all of you. Housekeeping, bathrooms are behind you. Like I said, there is still some food, I think, out. There will be coffee all day. If coffee is out, please let me or Brenda or Michaela know. Brenda is in the back of the room. You've been getting many emails from Brenda. Thank you, Brenda. She can also help with coffee needs and any other questions. What else is housekeeping? We have a childcare timeline that we put together thanks to Bobby Weber, who you will notice is not here today. She is in the San Juan Islands. So we can all be thankful that Bobby is enjoying her retirement. It was a faux pas on our part. We didn't coordinate time. And so I'm sure she'll be here next year. But thanks to her, she's been tracking what's been going on in Oregon and federally for a long time. And so we have a poster in the back that one of our lovely graduate students, Alexis, put together. And so please take a look. If you see something missing, add a sticky note, because then at the end of the day, we'll put it all together and then send it back out to all of you, because we are in our 25th year, and it's important, and it's been very useful for me in my first full year here in this role to be able to look back to see that progress is being made, and that it's messy work, but we're getting somewhere, and that the field has come a long ways. And then at the end of the day, we'll have some time to think forward, and David Mandel will be here to help talk about where the early learning division is thinking about and this race to the top in those. And so have a time to look forward. And we will also have some cake and apple cider for a toast at the end of the day. We are being filmed and live streamed, so you all probably got the info about that. This is also being recorded, so please know that. If you do not talk into the microphone, the people who are here virtually, hello people virtual, they can't hear you. So also, if you notice somebody says something and we need to repeat a question, help me out. I'll try to remember to repeat questions, but help. We'll get through this day together. We are going to talk about some pretty important stuff we know that really affects our, oops. Uh-oh, I don't know the slide. Let's go ahead and do our introductions, and then I have a slide that will come back around. I know there's a lot of us in this room, and doing introductions is tough, but I really think it's an important thing to do. We have people from the research world, from the policy world, from the practice world, from everything in between, from our own experiences as parents, of knowing children, of being providers. And so I'm hoping that we can go through the room and have everyone say their name and their title, and as a way to say hello to everyone. We will also have opportunities, like I said, to mingle, and we'll be sharing everyone's name and emails, unless you don't want me to, after this event. Because although we're here and I'm up here talking to you all, the goal is to have a conversation. As this group gets bigger, it gets a little more tricky, and we do have a lot we want to make sure it gets out. But please know that we're striving for time. So let's go ahead and go around and do introductions. We're going to pass the mic. And so first, I guess have I introduced myself? Okay, good. I was like, did I even say who I am? Okay, here you go.
Megan McDonald. I'm an associate professor of kinesiology at Oregon State University, and as I mentioned, the early childhood research core director at the Hayward Center.
Good morning, Dana Blakeney-Hipsch at the Early Learning Division, working on Baby Promise.
Hi, I'm Beth Green. I'm the Director of Early Childhood and Family Support Research at Portland State.
Hi, I'm Alicia Miao. I'm a former State Policy Fellow at the ELD and currently helping on the research side with the needs assessment for PDG.
I'm Joan Blough, the Community Systems Director from the Early Learning Division.
Hi, I'm Andy Bales-Molnar, and I'm a Preschool Improvement Specialist with the Early Learning Division.
Good morning, John Reeves with the Early Learning Division, Infant Toddler Specialist.
Beth Unverzad, Oregon After School for Kids, and I'm the director of the network.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Soto. I am the equity coordinator, also with Oregon After School for Kids. Pass it on to my colleague.
I'm Katie Wakey. I'm also with Oregon After School for Kids, and I'm the research manager.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sky Hubbard-Swanson. I'm with the Marion and Polk Early Learning Hub. I'm the Building Social and Emotional Capacity Project Coordinator.
Hi, I'm Margie Lau, also with the Marion and Polk Early Learning Hub, and I do fiscal and performance and a lot of grant development.
Leslie Mogill, and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator for Early Learning and Parenting Together, Washington County.
Hi, I'm Maxwell Olua. I'm the Program Manager for Space Program Manager at CAIRO. CAIRO is Center for African Immigrant and Refugee Organization.
Morning, everyone. John Nimmo. I'm an Associate Professor in Early Childhood at Portland State.
Hi, I'm Shelly Stratton. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Development at CAIRO, the Center for African Immigrants and Refugees.
Hi, I'm Khatra Hussein, and I am the Cultural Navigator at CAIRO.
Hi, I'm Sydney Train. I'm the Focused Childcare Network Coordinator for the Early Learning Division.
Good morning. I'm Bridget Hetfield. I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University in Human Development and Family Sciences.
And I'm Michaela Seckman. I'm a senior research assistant at Oregon State University and work on several of the partnership projects. And then in my other hat, I'm also an evaluation specialist for the Oregon Parenting Education Collaborative.
Good morning. My name is Ronnie Pham. I work with the Early Learning Division and I work in professional development.
I'm Mark Wardell. I'm a data geek for the Early Learning Division.
Good morning. I'm Sybil Guy. I work at the Research Institute at Western Oregon University.
Good morning. I'm Sherry Friedman. I also work at TRI at Western Oregon University, and I'm an information systems analyst as well as a database administrator for NACAWARE.
Good morning. I'm Shannon Vandehei, Program Director of Child Care Resource and Referral for Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties.
Hi, I'm Ashley Pearson, Senior Researcher at Education Northwest.
Good morning. I'm Fonda Sanchez. I work with IRCO, the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, and I'm a research and evaluation specialist with our youth program.
Good morning. I'm Dee Hayward. I'm from IRCO. I'm working in Children Department as a program coordinator.
Good morning. I'm Jim Mignano, data specialist at the Oregon Center for Career Development at Portland State University, and I'm one of the administrators of the Oregon Registry Online.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Hall, and I work for the Early Learning Hub of Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties, and I'm the project manager, and I work with the data and evaluation work group.
Good morning. I'm Kathleen McDonald, and I'm the director of the Child Development Center at Oregon State University.
Good morning. I'm Lynette Weinkoop, and I am the program coordinator for the Child Care Resource and Referral in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties.
Hey, everybody. I'm Karen Hinkemeyer. I'm the director of CCR&R in Washington County.
Good morning. I'm Jerry Wolf. I am the department chair for parenting education and family connections at Lynn Benton Community College, which includes our CCR.
Going away from the circle makes sense.
Hi, I'm Maria Duryea with the Oregon Department of Human Services. I'm an analyst, and I'm working on the Parents and Children Thriving Together 2 Generations or Cross Generations project and human-centered design.
I'm Kevin Hamler-Dupaul. I'm with the Department of Human Services and Oregon Health Authority. I'm a researcher and caseload forecaster.
Jamal Green, Research Analyst 4 with the Department of Human Services and the Array team.
Hi, Joanna Shreve. I am a research analyst at the Early Learning Division.
Good morning. I'm Ann Morrison. I'm the Preschool Development Grant Manager at the Early Learning Division.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alexia Kashowski. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Chief of Staff for State Representative Karin Power, who is one of the few legislators who in the Capitol who has a young child. So we end up working on a lot of these childcare issues. So I'm very excited to learn today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom George. I'm a research analyst for the Oregon Department of Education.
Good morning, Adam Freer. I'm the director of the Early Learning and the Parenting Hub in Washington County.
Good morning, Alma Amador, Department of Human Services, Child Care Policy Analyst.
Hello, I'm Regina Siebert. I also work at the Department of Human Services as a child care policy analyst.
Hi, I'm Jen Eras. I'm also with the Department of Human Services Child Care Subsidy Policy Analyst.
Hi, good morning. I'm Marina Merrill. I'm with the Children's Institute as the Director of Research and Strategy.
Hi, I'm Ingrid Anderson. I'm at Portland State University. I coordinate the Infant Toddler Mental Health Program and co-coordinate the Masters of Early Childhood.
Hi, I'm Sue Bino, the Senior Early Education Advisor for Children's Institute and doctoral student and adjunct faculty at Portland State.
Hi, I'm Alexis Mercoulieff, and I'm a graduate student at Oregon State University.
Hi, I'm Kylie Probert. I'm a PhD grad student at Oregon State University, and I work with Bridget Hatfield, and I'm excited to learn.
Wow, we did it. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for taking a moment to introduce yourselves. It makes a big difference. Now we're going to see if my slide works. So we're going to have our first panel come up in just a minute and do a little transition and make sure everyone has mics and stuff. But before we do, we're going to talk about some really important things today, and in thinking about how to set the stage, I think introducing ourselves, seeing we all have different expertise. We all have things we don't know. Childcare, early learning systems are jargony and confusing. And I'm putting that out there so that you all know it's okay if you don't know what's going on. If you hear something you don't know, please ask, because someone else in the room also has no idea what's going on, okay? Including possibly myself. So I hope that helps people please ask questions. We have so much expertise in this room. And in starting, we want to lay some ground rules and just some reminders, I think, are just something I'm like, well, I should probably just read something like this every day to myself. Value each individual for the experience and expertise that they're bringing to this room today. Please recognize that we all have something to learn from one another. Like I said, we're all experts and we're all completely naive about certain things. Assume positive intent. We're going to talk about the different age groups. We're going to talk about issues potentially of race, of immigration status, of all sorts of different things. And so please assume that we're all here, we're all doing our best. Positive intent is at the core. And listen to understand. We all come in with our lenses, like I said, in terms of professionally, but also our own upbringing and our own family experiences and having our own kids. I will say now having a 2.5-year-old, I get that more than I ever did. That the researcher brain and like mom brain don't always talk to each other. And so knowing where you're coming from and recognizing those thoughts that come along with it. And acknowledge that making mistakes is a part of learning. Please ask questions. Please ask for, put things out there as we go through today. So on that note, let's go ahead and do a little transition. So we have the morning group, and Joan will be getting us started. So bear with us for just a minute. So if you're a morning group person, please come on up. And it's always kind of hard. We'll start out all together, but as the presentations go on, we'll also can fill in if you want to be able to see the screens. We're going to need more chairs. Let's all start up front, and then, yes, and if you need bathroom break, yogurt break, now's the time. Yeah, and as we go, yeah, you can always like come back. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are making their way back. So I'm very excited about this first panel today, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Joan, who will be moderating, and she is the Community Systems Director at the Early Learning Division, and we're going to, I'll just pass it on.
So good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to moderate this wonderful panel that is doing such interesting work. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this panel from just from sort of a macro level is it's a real opportunity to learn about our early learning workforce from different levels in the system, from the level of the PDG needs assessment, which is, you know, a very statewide perspective, so they're going to kind of come down into what can the PDG needs assessment tell us about the needs of culturally diverse families and providers so far. And Beth and Ann are going to be talking about that. And then we kind of come down a level, and we're going to hear some from some folks at IRCO about their preschool research project, and what they did to kind of dig deeper into the express needs of their community for culturally specific preschool, and to really understand if a gap existed related to the preschool environment that's responsive to cultural and linguistic diversity. And then we're going to come down another level and actually hear about a project around strengthening the capacity of cultural navigators, and learn a bit about community engagement and a cultural wealth model, which is fascinating. I'm so excited to learn more about that. And it really was a participatory project, and truly the implementation of a potential solution. And they're going to tell us more about that. So it's an opportunity for us to have kind of a more holistic picture of some very important attributes of our early learning workforce. So I'm going to turn it over to Bethany.
Well, good morning again. I'm Ann Morrison, the Preschool Development Grant Manager with the Early Learning Division. I wanted to open this up talking a little bit about what the Preschool Development Grant is, for those of you who are not as immersed in it as I am right now. It's a one-year federal grant. It's really intended to do some sort of ground laying and preparation for what the early learning system looks like for children and families and providers in Oregon. So most of the work is dedicated to the strengths and needs assessment that we'll be talking about. Beth will be presenting some of our initial findings on. That data is really intended to be used to refine and inform our statewide strategic plan. We are lucky enough in Oregon that we already have one, Raise Up Oregon. So we're really looking at how this data can be used to kind of update and inform our priorities in the strategic plan moving forward. And then we do some work to support early childhood systems. So thinking about how we can maximize family choice through this model, thinking about ways that we can share best practice to providers, and then how we improve the overall quality of our early childhood education system. I will say that the Preschool Development Grant, as its name implies, is very focused on the early childhood education system, but understands that it exists within a larger realm of early learning supports to families with children birth to 5. And so our focus there is really on that group and programs that support that population. So as I mentioned, our Raise Up Oregon is our strategic plan. I know we're going to talk a little bit about it more later in the day. But all the data, the work that's being done here is really intended to support and lift up some priorities that have been established through this strategic plan and to accelerate some of our goals around that project. So speaking specifically about the strengths and needs assessment, I think what we're looking to do is take a look at the reach and the quality of available programs right now across the state for children and families. To understand the capacity of the workforce and around providers in the system, and then really to inform local as well as statewide planning. So we've already begun to use some of this data in some of our initial conceptions of some regional planning work, and we'll continue to do that as we get our final findings out and continue to kind of operationalize the work that we find through here. And so with this, I will hand it on over to Beth to talk about some of our findings.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anne. I'm happy to be here today and to share just a few snippets of the data that we have so far. There we go. Talk a little bit just about, give you the big picture of all the data that we're collecting for the PDG grant. And again, thinking about cobbling together data that can tell us about the 0 to 5 service system, which people in this room probably recognize. There's no data system that we can easily go to, so it really is cobbling together the pieces, as well as the broader systems of supports for families and children, as well as what we can learn about the workforce that's involved, and what and where families' needs are being met, and how we can improve the system. So we have work that's proceeding in basically 2 phases. Phase 1, do I have a pointer? I do, that's so exciting. So phase 1, which we are complete with the data collection phase, but we'll have our final report to the ELD for phase 1 at the end of October. We released a little bit of data last week, which I'm going to be sharing a tiny bit of today to our hub partners to help them with their local community planning processes. So the first phase is really focused heavily on bringing together different sources of administrative data about the early learning and the birth to 5 system, including national and census data that can tell us about characteristics of the population, state agency administrative data. Lots of people in this room provided information to us to help us try to learn about 0 to 5 and what's happening across Oregon state agencies that interface with families with young children. State-funded early learning program data, so data that's compiled by the Oregon Department of Education around Head Start, OPK, Preschool Promise, Relief Nurseries, and then information about childcare quality of facilities and the workforce. We also did, and my partner on this project, who is not here yet, but she'll be here this afternoon, she's on the agenda, Catherine Pears, was the lead on this piece. We fielded a large survey, went out to all licensed childcare providers in the state of Oregon. We got about 1,400 responses, which is about 15 to 20%, which is pretty good for fielding a large online survey. This went out to all licensed childcare providers, to the directors, as well as the teachers. So I'm not going to have any of that data today, but stay tuned. And then the second phase, which is in process, and we're working with a number of different advisory groups on these pieces, will really be able to hopefully tell us more at a deeper level about what the needs are in the system, right? Because you can only learn so much from administrative data. It can tell you big picture what's going on, but that data, if you've ever really tried to use it, it has a lot of caveats always, and it also, different agencies, different ways of asking about family characteristics differ. So what we can know in the context of today's panel in terms of racial and ethnic differences across the state, linguistic diversity, immigrant and refugee status, specifically for young children, is fairly broad strokes when you're talking about using administrative data. Not that it doesn't tell us anything. I think there's some important things that can be gleaned, but we have 2 other ways to hear from families and hopefully dig a little deeper into understanding family needs and barriers in the birth to 5 system. The first is we are going to be doing a statewide representative household survey. That'll be a telephone survey that's going to be rolled out in November. We're hoping to reach about 1,500 Oregon families. We'll have oversampling so that we can look at families specifically who are Latinx, as well as families who are what we consider more in the working poor category, so less than 200% federal poverty level. We'll also have representation and oversampling at the regional level, so we can look at families across urban, rural, and frontier regions of the state. So very excited about that, have an opportunity to ask families about their use and needs of the early childhood system. We're also coordinating with community partners around building and doing some family listening sessions. And we've been compiling information that's been done in terms of a lot of the work that's happened through the hubs and other strategies for listening to families and hearing from them and trying to identify what don't we know, what haven't we heard, who haven't we heard from, and then reaching out to community partner organizations to help us work with those families. So that work is just getting underway, and there's folks in this room I want to connect with around potentially helping us to make that work really authentic in a way that we can hear family voices and elevate those voices in terms of the 0 to 5 system. Okay, so too long, that's the big picture of the data collection that's happening. And the timeline is, you know, federal timeline is crazy. We'll have the data all completed by the end of February of 2020. So that seems right around the corner to me. All right, so I'm gonna share a few snippets of data and then turn it over to the other folks on this panel who are gonna provide, I think, really interesting information about the work that they're doing with immigrant and refugee communities. So, but the question to me was, what can we get from the PDG needs assessment? We don't have all the data put together yet, obviously. So just a few snippets from some of those administrative data sources that we've been pulling that kind of can set the stage, I think, for understanding this question of how Oregon can best really meet the needs of our increasingly culturally and linguistically diverse population. Okay, so what we did for today was to group the data by region. And these are based on some categories developed by Oregon State University. So you can see I've categorized the frontier region, counties here, primarily rural counties here. I'll give you a minute to look at that. You can think about the county communities that you work with or live in. The mixed urban-rural communities here, and then the primarily urban communities over here. So we're going to look at the groupings today using those sets of counties. So it gives you a little context. Okay. So my first slide looks at just where are the culturally diverse children and providers, children 0 to 5 and providers that work with them. So this is the childcare workforce that we're talking about here. And I think one of the things that is really interesting about this information is it shows us how much diversity there is across the state. It's not just urban areas where there's diversity. And the other thing to point out, so you can see here, in terms of these are the frontier communities, and apologies to people on the other side. You can't see my pointer, but hopefully you can figure it out from the labels. The frontier communities, we're seeing over 20% of children 0 to 5 in those frontier regions are Latinx. So that is, to me, very interesting because we do tend to think in some of those rural and frontier communities that there's not so many diverse families. Well, there really is, and it's growing faster all the time, right? You can also see across the range here, there's quite a few children who fall into this multiple race categories. So these are children who have parents with different ethnic and racial backgrounds. And you can see the blue, so the purple are our 0 to 5 population. The blue or teal are the number of providers in those communities who are within each group. So you can see here, and this is pretty consistent across the state, that there's about a 5 to 6% gap between the number of providers who, in this case, are Latinx versus the number of providers who are, the percentage of providers or children who are 0 to 5. So we kind of have known this for a while, but it's going to be increasingly true because that 0 to 5 population, especially ethnic minority children, is growing faster than the rest of the population. That gap between having providers who really represent those families' cultural backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds, that gap is likely to get bigger, but we're trying to offset it by ways of supporting the workforce to get more linguistically and culturally diverse families into supported high-quality childcare providing. Okay. This is the mixed urban-rural, and you can see, yes, the urban areas are higher in terms of overall percentage of Latinx children and providers, but interestingly, the gap between children and providers is about the same. right? So we have that work to do in terms of supporting a workforce, diverse workforce that's really across the state. You can also see again here that these percentages, mixed urban rural, were very similar to the ones we were seeing before, right? So really, there are a higher percentage of children, diverse children and providers in urban regions, but there's quite a bit of diversity, 20 to 25% across all of the rest of the states, especially when we look at those Latinx children, and really across the board, if you look at the other groups that we have represented here. Those numbers are small, right? But they're there, right? They're there. And in these larger groups, or in these larger communities, the percentages represent significant numbers of children who are Asian, Pacific Islander, who are Native American, who are Black or African American, and multiracial. I'll let you take that in for just a second. The next slide has to do with linguistic diversity, and unfortunately we don't have the fine-grained data here to talk about which languages, but you can guess that primarily it's Spanish-speaking children, since that's the large, and Spanish-speaking providers. But again, here you see those gaps between the number or the percentage of children who speak these languages and the percentage of providers who speak these languages. And you can see again these gaps between providers who speak their home language and children who speak a language other than English. These are from the workforce study. So where's Michaela, my expert? Yeah. Could everybody hear that? So I'm not sure I can provide all of that detail, but the answer is yes, it's regulated providers. It's the teacher and first assistant or aide in 2. She knows this stuff so well. let's let the, yeah. It's a pretty big swath of providers, though not all. All right. Just a few fun facts, as my daughter would say. Fun fact, Mom. Fun fact. I thought they were kind of fun. So the first one is just, of the 7 counties with over 30% Latinx children, 2 are frontier, 4 are rural, and only 1 is urban. I thought that was fascinating. Maybe if you live in one of those rural frontier areas, maybe you knew this already, but I didn't know that. This one, a little less surprising. All of the 4 counties that have more than 5% Native American children, American Indian children, are rural or frontier, right? So that's representing those rural reservation areas primarily. And then lastly, counties with the greatest percentage of linguistically diverse children. I was fascinated by this list. Hood River, 39% of the children living in that community speak a language other than English, primarily. Morrow County, 36%, Marion County, 35%, Umatilla, 32%, and Malheur, 31%. I thought this was fascinating. I mean, I think the big takeaway here is these families exist all across the state, and we have a lot of work to do to start building systems that can better meet their needs. Okay, so just a few more. I'm going to leave you with a few interesting fun facts, and actually this is from the provider survey data. So this was in our survey of provider programs that I mentioned, and we thought this was interesting. Not quite sure what it means exactly, but so of the 67% of the provider directors, so this was the director of the program if it was the center, or the provider owner if it's a family base, reported using a curriculum. So about 2/3 of the providers out there that we surveyed say that yes, they use a curriculum. Of these, about half felt that that curriculum was culturally responsive, which we thought was interesting and higher maybe than we expected. 87% of the OPK and preschool promise sites that responded felt that their curriculum was culturally responsive, which we also thought was very interesting. And the reasons were, it shows respect for other cultures, it treats the classroom like a community, and it addresses different learning styles. So we thought that was interesting, that that was sort of their understanding of what it meant to be culturally responsive. And then finally, I'll leave you with this, that the curriculum most often used by these providers was creative curriculum. So you can think about, if you know curricula, how, to what extent you think creative curriculum is actually culturally responsive. It's certainly not developed specifically for communities who are culturally and linguistically diverse. So that was just fun facts. Again, interesting food for thought for our day. All right, I think I'm a little bit over time, so I probably need to wrap up. All right.
Yes. Oh, okay. Do people have any clarifying questions or sort of immediate questions that come to mind for Beth or Anne about any of the information that they've shared? Okay. Please.
Data that looks at quality, really broad strokes in terms of education, and we have some data on quality. I don't think we can link it up exactly, unfortunately, to that level of information in terms of the providers who are reflected here, unfortunately. Capacity is measured at the facility level, so we don't know at the facility level. It's hard to mash up race, ethnicity, unfortunately. They wouldn't have been in this survey. We only had email and contact information for the license provider.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to our next presenters.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Megan, for having us. My name is Fonda Sanchez. I'm a research and evaluation specialist with IRCO, the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization in Portland.
My name is Dee Hayward. I'm come from IRCO as well, and I am a program coordinator from Children's Services Department.
And today we are going to be presenting some community-driven research that we did a couple years ago on behalf of our immigrant and refugee communities. Our presentation, as you see, is early learning priorities and needs of our immigrant and refugee families. So just to give you a very brief history of IRCO, as I said, we are located in Portland, Oregon. Our mission is to promote the integration of immigrants and refugees and the community at large into a self-sufficient, healthy, and inclusive multi-ethnic society. IRCO was established in 1976, so we have over 40 long years of history working with immigrant and refugee populations. And we are so unique, and we provide culturally specific and linguistic specific services to our communities.
So for our early learning visions, we also have we also align with IRCO missions. We still focus on immigrant and refugee children, prepare them for kindergarten ready. We're looking into different needs, and based on the research from year one, we interview 9 focus groups, and we learn a bit about their needs, and we have put a plan together, and so we come up with these early learning visions, and we try to also we focus on parents and families, try to help them understand about the U.S. education system here, and also help them understand the process, how to enroll their children into the from the preschool into the school level. And also we also planning to provide recruit the teaching team that from the community who understand the culture, who experience working with immigrant and refugee families, and also come from the community. That's our goal of getting the service provider. And also we're planning to have no cost of services because we know that a lot of families from immigrant and refugees have financial struggle, and we're looking for the funding to support the family.
So in considering our early learning vision for IRCO and how we would best provide services to our communities, sort of the questions that we had going into this research were, what with this early learning vision, what does this mean for our immigrant and refugee populations? What are the needs? What culturally specific and responsive needs do they have? And so to give a little background about the research, our community expressed the need for culturally specific preschools and early learning opportunities. So IRCO proposed a community-driven study to be conducted to assess those needs and to define if a gap existed for early learning in a preschool environment that is culturally and linguistically diverse. And so we proposed this to Social Venture Partners, which is also located in Portland, focuses a lot on early childhood education and philanthropy. And we were awarded a grant to fund the research and collect information on best practices of programs serving immigrant and refugee families. And SVP also supported the research with their own expertise and volunteer time in collecting program model information, as well as our amazing staff at IRCO who connected us with their families and clients who have children ages 0 to 3.
Like mentioned before, the 9 focus group that we have choose from the communities from Northeast and Southeast Portland. This 9 focus group have a great relationship with IRCO staff who brought into the interview, and so they share a lot about what they want from the preschool services. The 9 focus group are from Latino, Vietnamese, Middle East, Congolese, Somali, and the list that the rest of the list is there. So when we talk to these focus groups, so we learn a lot about what they want from the providers. So we use that information to plan for the year 2. We're still working with the SVP. The SVP team also part of the interview, and we put that on the year 1 report. That's also on our website, IRCO. You can read the full report on that. What are the detail of the interview, so you can see what it is 9 focus group are talking about, and we also continue to work with them, even though we done the first year, and we still bring them back and to share about what they want in the future.
Thank you. And yes, so with those target populations, as Dee mentioned, we held 9 focus groups. They were incredibly diverse with language and generations. There were grandparents as caregivers who attended, parents, aunties, uncles, and of course children were in the room, and lots of food. And then the location of the focus groups, we did those at one of our IRCO offices. So some of the, so there were a lot of research findings. So many that I will go into detail about some, just to save for time, but would be happy to clarify any that I don't go into detail about. So these research findings, I would say, came up across the communities that we held the focus groups with. So a lot of similarities came up, some differences, but very much heavily on similarities. So starting with language access barriers. So our communities expressed that there are challenges when it comes to teacher-parent communication in the school, understanding requirements for their children and school policies, homework, having only homework provided in English, affordability and access, exclusion due to income-based guidelines. So those two sort of go hand in hand, as you can imagine. If there's single or single parent households where there's only one income coming in, or 2-parent households where they don't meet the income guideline or they're just below it. And often with affordability and access, parents found that they're often put on wait lists that can be, I'm sure, incredibly a long period of time to get their children into daycare or early childhood preschool. Transportation, so needs around bus fare and needs around having access to reliable transportation for their child. Folks express the need for like the school to have their own school bus to pick up and drop their kids off. Flexible hours, so in terms of whether the parent has the access to drop-in daycare. So whether it's a preschool that has longer days or longer times, or if a parent has the ability to drop their child off for some time. So disconnect from culture. Parents express that they are concerned when their child goes to school. Some folks had children who were a little bit older already in the school system, so in kindergarten K through 8 and felt that their child was or had been experiencing just a lack of what do I want to say? So disconnect from culture, right? So unable to have sort of the same understanding of their own histories and their own traditions in their culture, as well as a loss of language. So in mainstream school, there's a heavy focus on English, right? And learning English, and the child tends to want to focus on that learning of that skill. And so parents would see that their child is losing their native tongue. And we also have separation anxiety. Oh, so balance of learning English and native language came from that. Separation anxiety, parents express that children, when they've seen when their children go to school, when they're ready for when they're going into kindergarten, having not had that previous experience going to a preschool, the child doesn't then want to let go and go on to kindergarten. They don't know, they don't have that transition skill and readiness to support them. And then bullying in the school because of their background, the language skills that they have or don't have in English, and also around trauma-informed teachers and staff. So expressing the need for more teachers who understand the experience of, or who are trained to understand the experience of immigrant and refugees. And just a few more, sharing cultures and traditions, having bilingual education, meals in the school were very important to families, whether meals are prepared halal or if children are vegetarian, oral traditions. So thinking more in terms of parents who did not have formal education themselves and may not know how to read or write. And so the passing of information is only printed. And so how do we connect? How do we bridge that gap where parents who need other ways of communication and in their language to understand what the school is asking of them or what teachers are asking of them. Parents, they would like to see more parents included in the classroom as volunteers, to be teachers to their children, to learn how to teach their children, as well as including art, music, physical activities, multiple languages. There are other concerns around safe outdoor spaces, and then also highlighting that they would like to see teachers from their communities at this at a hypothetical preschool. And so to finish, just some concluding remarks after having completed the research. We at IRCO are still, and Dee will go into this further, but still hanging on to some challenges of how to best create a preschool or early learning education system where it's culturally responsive to the needs of the community who are so diverse. And how do we do that with such a multicultural group? So we're doing this through continuing evaluation and program models to develop a sort of metric of success, as well as partnering with other local community organizations for resources, for support, and for learning for ourselves.
So our next step, we have a long list of things to do, just like many preschool that just first started. We're still working. We're still looking for who will bring into the next level of research and working and pre-implementations. So we're looking about. I think the main thing that we need to really consider is site and locations, where exactly we want our preschool to be. We have rough ideas that will be in Southeast and Northeast Portland, and we're planning to have more than one site. But right now we want to try the first one, how successful that is, we know that it's a long wait. It's going to be a long wait list because we know that there is high needs and a lot of parents already said, when is it going to be open? Because they don't understand how long, what the process looks like, how hard is it to find the money to create the preschool for their children, but they really need that. They really need this preschool to start, and so they can, bring their children in where they feel safe, where they can talk to the provider and they can feel that they be understood. And so we're still working with the SVP. We're still having a lot of meetings around the funding, and we're still having a lot of meetings around hiring the curriculum specialists who are going to be appropriate for our preschool. We're still gonna looking for volunteers who have different expertise around early childhood and also how to start up this business and to take this project off the ground. But we're working hard to get that started.
Thank you so much. Are there some questions folks like to ask our two presenters about the work that they've been doing at this point in time? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit briefly about the other kind of community organizations that you've been partnering and working with that you found to be most helpful on the journey that you've been on so far. I think it'd be helpful.
So we have a lot of support from different sites. We went to CAIRO to visit, and they gave us some support and idea. And we went to Latino, Ready, Set, Go, and working with, it is a lot of preschools that we went to visit to see how how they run their preschool. And we just choose the different idea that appropriate to our communities and the children that we're going to serve. But we're really happy that they support us, and we will continue to do the partnership and building a relationship with them.
It looks like we have a question in the back. So Megan, do you want to?
Dee, which areas were you talking about citing those new preschools, the IRCO preschool?
Where? Oh, like the physical location of a. Oh, sure. So where we primarily serve, where our communities are in the outer southeast, northeast areas of Portland. So we have a big community so I work in our youth program. So just thinking about the school districts where we have, where we serve many youth within the Reynolds School District, which is out in Fairview near Troutdale. So a little bit further out, but closer in to Portland within David Douglas School District and in PPS as well. Do you have any other thoughts?
We also using ETO data to identify where the high population of immigrant and refugees. So we identify the zip code, and it's significantly different from certain zip code and the other. So we know where we kind of aim for, but it's because the site, and we need to work with a licensing specialist and to understand about zoning and planning, and that's why we kind of, it's complicated, so that's why we kind of like, but we know where we kind of drop the idea where we want to find our piece.
Yeah, I think because our communities are so spread out around the area that yes, it is about really honing in on where would be the best accessibility for folks to get to. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we were just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the focus groups, about how you selected and trained the facilitators for those, and then the sort of structure of those best practices.
Okay, so let's see. So it was myself and one other researcher who's not at IRCO now, but we created the questions, and we met with our staff who support directly our clients to go over them and for appropriateness, and if they would make sense, asked in their own language. We then used interpreters, both contracted interpreters and staff support as well. We had staff who worked with the clients that were there to be there so that their clients would feel comfortable and in meeting us. And let's see what else. There were, so they roughly lasted 1.5 hours average. I think with working with such diverse communities, folks would drop in and come in as they were able to. They also, a lot of women, I would say primarily women, mothers, came to these focus groups with their children. And we provided childcare on site during the focus groups, but oftentimes the children would just, they would join us because of comfort and needing to be with the mom and all that. And it was fabulous, actually. And then lots of food and was there as well. Let me see. So roughly, I mean, ideally 8 to 10 people in a focus group, but there were communities who really wanted to show up and be there, and we maybe had as many as 12 to 13 too. And then various languages spoken as well. I think we found with our Burmese community that there were, for example, I think maybe 4 different languages spoken, 4 to 5, and then as well with our Congolese community between 2 and 3. But just that, knowing that range of diversity among our communities is definitely a question we still have. Like, how are we going to best reach them and support them? Did you have any other questions around that? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just real quick, because I didn't really hear. What data source did you say that you used to identify high needs? I think you talked about, I think it was D that.
Oh, yeah. So we have a database system that we use at IRCO to track our client needs. It's called Efforts to Outcomes, ETO. And so that's how we identified how, what populations we serve the most. Mm-hmm.
All right. Along with that, we also go to the Children's Service Department in different programs. So we interview the staff and looking for the number from 0 to 3 years old, how many children in each program that might need the preschool services within the next 2 years or 1 or 2 years. So that's why we're looking at 0 to 3. When by the time we have our preschool start, they might at the age of ready to start preschool. So we're using ETO data because the family who are in our data already in our program. So a lot of families who live in Southeast Portland, and it's thousands of families in our program anyway. So that's really interesting when we separate different zip code and we see how different between different zip code and how is it the high need is really the certain zip code have really high population of immigrant and refugees. So it's very interesting. I forgot to put in a slide because I just didn't have time to do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we're going to transition now to our last presenters.
Good morning. Is everyone okay with us presenting here, sitting down? Is it on now? Closer? Is it working now? That one works better. Can you hear me now? Just to remind you, actually, I just want to mention too, there are handouts on the table. So, and if there's anyone who didn't get one, we just put a few on each table. Maxwell will be happy to bring it over to you. And there's also a flyer of CAIRO programs. So, and just to remind you, I'm Shelly Stratton. I'm the Director of Programs and Development at CAIRO, the Center for African Immigrants and Refugees organization. And I'm going to do the introduction and kind of setting the stage for the kind of work that we were doing. Khatra is one of our cultural navigators at CAIRO, and she's going to add some of the pieces around the cultural navigators themselves, their voices, and some of the comments that cultural navigators contributed to this research project. And then John from PSU is going to outline a little bit more thoroughly the themes that arose out of our work together. Okay, so in the beginning, no, wrong way. Yeah, is it going to do that every time? Hopefully not. So in the beginning, we were talking together about ways to develop an opportunity for cultural navigators to build their skills and go into the schools. We have cultural navigators who are in Reynolds School District and Beaverton at CAIRO, and then another organization that we collaborated with, African Youth and Community Organization. They have cultural navigators who are working more closely with youth and families in the community, and they have students who are in David Douglas and Reynolds, or David Douglas, Reynolds, and PBS. And so the two culturally specific organizations, IRCO also works with African immigrants, primarily Somali, and then CAIRO, it was founded and developed, and the majority of staff are from African communities. And then, of course, the communities that we serve are primarily from Somalia, but also an increasing number of people from the Congo and other parts of Africa as well. So IRCO and CAIRO and PSU came together to try to figure out a plan for how we could access the funding from the Oregon Department of Education. They were, as many of you know, they put together some funding for the African American Black Student Success Grant, is what they call it, and an effort to try to address the appalling gap between how well African American and Black students are doing in the schools and their white peers. And so our idea was to bring the two organizations and PSU together to really look at what do we need to be doing? What kinds of supports do we need to be offering, not just the families, but the schools as well? And where we talked a lot about the importance of that there are resources within the programs that exist and with the cultural navigators that we're working with, and how do we draw that out and use that to our advantage and develop something that was really meaningful to our organizations, but also the cultural navigators in their work. So the goals of the project were to better understand and define the role of the cultural navigators within a community cultural wealth model, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And then to develop a professional development process that was based on the input and the participation of those cultural navigators. So rather than PSU coming in or me coming in and saying, this is your job and this is the information you need to know, really working closely with them to identify for themselves what they needed to know and what their communities needed to know. And the outcome of that would be our hope, and what we have found to be true, a new model and framework that's grounded in the lived experience of the cultural and in cultural perspectives, and developing really much more effective and deeper opportunities for bridging with the schools. One of the things that I hear all the time from families, as we also are doing a participatory action research project with parents, and a dominant theme is the schools are not ready for our children. And so this is an effort to create a model for how do we better prepare the schools for these children using the cultural wealth of our cultural navigators and our families to inform that work, because I think we're doing too much of kind of deciding what families need rather than asking them or finding effective ways to ask them. So we decided to use our cultural navigators and the communities that they were linking with to inform what we were doing. Part of the ODE grant was really focused on the cultural wealth, using the cultural wealth model by Yoso. And we took that very seriously, and partly because we felt it was a good model. So most of our work was focused around this idea that families come, immigrant communities, families come with wealth that we don't, too often we ignore, or we don't notice, we don't know quite what we're looking for. And so Yoso expands this idea to really look at what is the wealth, what is everything that a child or a family brings to this experience of trying to integrate. And so I'm only just going to point out a few of them, and you can take a closer look at the work. I think it is really important work to look at. But just thinking about like aspirational capital. Immigrants come with an incredible aspiration to succeed and to have their children go to college and be successful and learn the language. But we often overlook that because we're busy looking at the struggles that they're facing. So really thinking about where their aspirations, their capacity to navigate. I mean, just thinking about what the experience has been in the past, they've had to navigate extraordinary situations. Why is it so hard here to kind of capitalize on that and help to figure out how you navigate in this world? Of course, cultural capital, but I also find the resistance capital a very important area to think about. Like when a child or a family is dealing with situations that, you know, even with the best intentions, often bring with it situations that have implicit bias or active racism. How do you resist that? How do you stand up and speak for yourself? And I think that was a big piece of what we offered our cultural navigators is you have a voice, you have a right to speak up about things for and with your families. And we're going to help give you the tools. We're going to draw out the tools that you already have and figure out ways to make that more visible, those acts of resistance more visible and more effective. The role of the cultural navigator was a big piece of our conversation, and especially since we were all, this was a new funding, and we combined it with some other funding. This project was actually, we had a very modest request that was very much focused on the professional development of the cultural navigators. What's that? Oh, that's right, they didn't, yeah. So, go ahead and just put them all up. So the focus of our work in the beginning, we were just developing these roles for CAIRO. We have cultural navigators in the Beaverton School District and in Reynolds School District. And so we had placed our cultural navigators in those schools, two different schools, 2 full days, to just be present and supportive of the students and the staff and the teachers. And so we were learning how to do that. The focus of this funding was just on the professional development piece of it. So we would bring them together for regular professional development that was participatory, and we were gathering the themes that arose out of those trainings that we did together. So out of that, we did a lot of, thinking about the cultural navigators, what they do. They address access and equity issues in cultural communities. They were focused on the intersection of families and education. So we explored like, what's the dynamic of having families and this education system, and how do we think about bringing the two together, do that bridging. Cultural navigators have their own acculturation experience in both heritage and host cultures, acting as conduits to social resources. So we were really acknowledging and recognizing that they have the cultural navigators come with their own experience of coming to the U.S. as immigrants, most of them coming to the U.S. as refugees, resettled. Most of them have experience of being in the schools, coming with limited English or no English, or understanding of the culture. So drawing on that, but also recognizing that there are challenges in that. So you've experienced racism in the high school, that when you see it happening to the kids that you're working with, it really triggers something big. So how do you acknowledge that, recognize it, use the momentum that it gives you, but at the same time not let it create challenges between you and the schools, where you have to try to figure out how to improve what's happening rather than create enemies, because sometimes people are not so open to hearing what's going on. And then lastly, we worked at helping the cultural navigators to illuminate their voice and visibility with a cultural wealth perspective. In some cases, it didn't take long really, but there was an intentional shift in helping cultural navigators to shift away from a deficit model, where it's really easy, even if you come from those communities, to say, these families that struggle, they're having a hard time in school, the moms never go to the meetings, rather than looking at what these families have going on for them. And the deep commitment to wanting to be at those meetings, but working 5 jobs makes it hard. So we really have shifted the language and the ways that the cultural navigators think about their work. And, I'll talk a little bit later about that, what that leads to. But I think, I've just seen cultural navigators light up much more. They're excited and interested in being able to recognize the wealth in their communities and in their families, and are excited to have people listening to that. So one of the tools that we used was eco-mapping. And just, we think it's important to think about the kinds of tools that you use when you're doing this kind of participatory work. And a big piece of it, so some of the reasons that we used it is that it made the work very visible. You could see what the cultural navigators were working with, and they could look at it, capture their stories, and revisit it both individually, but also with others that they were sharing their stories with as we did this work together. You can have multiple people working on the same map, adding their pieces to the story. And with the eco mapping, we really had them focus in and hone in on what are the strengths, and it made it visible, rather than just talking about the challenges. They could look at their map and start talking and start noticing, well, okay, but this was a challenge between the principal and the parent, but this is what the parent did to shift that, or someone from the community was able to give a piece of information. So we really worked on trying to look at those gaps and where can we find some strengths and cultural wealth. And I think just it makes it more visible so that they could identify those gaps. It was an important piece. One thing that I just wanted to mention about the eco mapping is that one of our cultural navigators decided that it would be a really useful tool to work with students and teachers, where students were saying how racist the high school was and the teachers didn't understand. And we haven't done it yet, but she would really like to bring the students together to do some eco mapping and talk about their experience of racism, both in the hallways with students, but also with teachers. And then also sit down with the teachers and discuss and have them do eco maps and talk together about what they're seeing in these, instead of just getting into this bantering back and forth about who's right and wrong and who's racist. So Khatra's just going to share a few comments from cultural navigators.
Hi, I don't know if you guys can hear me. I am Khatra, and I am one of the cultural navigators. And being a cultural navigator gave me the opportunity to work with people from different backgrounds and different cultures. And here's what some of our cultural navigators that couldn't be here today had to say about the program. What comes out when drawing is different than writing reports. Just gives a glimpse into the reality. It's different for different groups. We're showing how this work is impacting our lives, the emotional labor of the work, and the complexity of the intercultural exchange, having help in looking at the image that supports us to maybe relook at the need and reframe or discover new ways at what's possible. So that's from some of our navigators had to say they couldn't be here today. So yeah.
So, hi, I'm John Nimmo, Portland State. So what did we learn from the cultural navigators? So this was, as we said before, was a participatory research in its approach. And was basically, we were documenting the dialogue of the cultural navigators and their mentors from IRCO and CAIRO as they engaged in these professional development activities over the course of 9 months, with a particular focus on their stories and collecting those stories. And so as a group, we were searching for emergent themes in the data that were then returned to the cultural navigators through the development of additional professional development experiences and discussions. So it was sort of a circular process of where actually the cultural navigators were essentially analyzing as they were creating new data. So we focused in on 4 core themes in our sort of initial analysis, which is ongoing. The first one, power, oppression, and school politics. The second, intersectional identities and history of navigators, roles and expertise of cultural navigation, and identifying and accessing community cultural wealth and networks. And so these themes not only helped us to better understand the role of the cultural navigator, but helped us to develop meaningful professional development activities. And I think you'll see some connections here to what IRCO discovered in their research. Some of the themes are very similar. So the first one is power, oppression, and school politics. So we sort of began with the assumption that schools are social institutions and they work to maintain the status quo of power in the society. So schools are oppressive by nature. That's what they're going to do if you don't disrupt it. So cultural navigators talked a lot about this need to negotiate the work between maybe simply coping with the racism that they were seeing and experiencing in the schools and disrupting it. And so, of course, that went beyond racism. We're talking about linguistic bias, we're talking about religious bias, and so forth. So we began to sort of reconceptualize, if we were taking a cultural wealth model, that actually cultural navigators needed to be disruptors of the system. And this is why we felt this was a really important model where folks were coming from the community rather than coming from the school. And one of the things we worked on was critical consciousness, really the awareness of cultural navigators, for all of us to reflect back on how our social identities played into the role we had and the way in which social institutions work to reinforce things like racism. One of the things we did, we used a method called Theater of the Oppressed from Augusto Boal's work in Brazil, which was really successful. And the cultural navigators we found were also supporting children's complex identity development. So these were children who had racialized identities, language differences, religious differences, and so forth. And so the cultural navigators' interventions were doing things like supporting children who were experiencing racialized bullying and name calling. What do you do when that actually is how do you deal with that situation? You really need to understand and be able to unpack what's going on. It's not just simply name calling, it's more complex than that. They also encountered a lot of need to examine and unpack the terminology and language that schools use, which often gets in the way of understanding what's going on. And so they really began to see that schools, districts, classrooms have kind of unwritten, often, codes and rules and policy that are not explicit or accessible. And so really trying to say, well, you can unpack that. You can figure out where did that come from and who said it and is it true? The second theme is, oh, sorry, we are still on this one. So the impact of also cultural, can you go back? Looking at the impact of, sorry, it's the second theme, I'm sorry. when you don't have the clicker, gets complicated. I'm not in control of the clicker. So the impact of cultural navigators' personal and cultural histories. So this was sort of part of digging deeper into this role of the disruptor, and that these cultural navigators were dealing with a lot of complexity when it came to social identities, not just of the families, but of themselves. And Shelly alluded to that before. So they had very complex identities that involved ethnicity, religion, language, race, gender, social class, and that these all intersect. They don't exist separately. And one of the challenges they faced was, how do I keep my own identity while also wanting to belong to the broader community, especially when others are saying you're different? So this is an experience for the families and communities, but it's also an experience for the cultural navigators who are working in these settings. How do we approach the cultural navigators' experience of trauma and oppression? So on one side, cultural navigators, we're drawing on that expertise and that experience, but it's not just like knowing a language. It's much more complex, that history that comes with being an immigrant or a refugee or being a person of color in the society. And what are the costs of doing that? So really thinking about the emotional labor of doing that, and how this professional role puts you in conflict between maybe the schools and what they were saying and what you knew and learned from your community and your own experience. So I think, Khatra, you had a couple of thoughts you wanted to share.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I personally have my own history with having a cultural navigator at school. I was born just right before the Somali war started. So my parents came to Kenya, which is in East Africa, to kind of get away from the war. We relocated there about when I was 3 months old, and we did not leave. We stayed there until I was like 13. When I was 13, my mom, dad, and there was 5 of us came to the U.S. And as you can tell, I was really excited because I didn't have to deal with the war. I didn't have to live in fear anymore. And I was just excited for the new life, but I found myself more depressed than where I was in my own country, because at least like I had friends, I had people that I could talk to. I had my older sister. She was a freshman in high school. My other 3 siblings went to an elementary school, and I got put on 7th grade, and I was the only person. When we were back home, I attended school with all, didn't have like, it was based on what knowledge you had. It wasn't about your age. It wasn't about like, it was just, they just put you, and I had my siblings all throughout my life. And I came here and I was like, no, you guys are separated. And we actually went to 3 different schools, and I found myself really depressed because I didn't speak the language. I didn't even know how to say my own name. So I would find myself sitting in classes throughout the day, having no one to talk to, no one that spoke my language, no one that looked like me. And that led me into a lot of trouble. Even though I was a good kid, I think I was just bored. So I would do things I wasn't supposed to do, maybe cut the teachers' papers, mess with the glues. And I think the principal was like, this is not working out. And then my mom and dad were confused. They're like, you're a good kid. Why are you doing this? Like, I'm there for like 6 to 7 hours. I have nothing to do. Even when I go to recess, I sat there and I didn't know how to interact with people. It was a new country. It was different culture, no friends. You sit there and like, you don't even know what the teacher's teaching. So you tend to get bored and you start to do things that you normally wouldn't do. So the school found a way to bring someone into the school. So that person came 2 days a week. They'll sit in class with me. And I found myself loving school. It kind of got me out of the depression that I was in. I never thought that I would be depressed here because my life back home was more depressing than here, but I found myself depressed here. But they were just like light into my day. They'll come in, they sit there until I was more comfortable with the language. That person stayed with me until I was in high school. So they were kind of like a mentor for me. It just helped me a lot to have them there. It made a huge difference that someone looked like me. I didn't have to sit there going crazy in my own head, like, how do I talk to friends? How do I make friends? Because like, who wants to talk to you when you can't even say your own name? And like, people did try, but I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to interact with them. So having that person there, and they kind of got me around the day. They visited 2 days a week. those 2 days that they were there with me, I had the most amazing time at school, and I was looking forward to those 2 days. It just helped me. So when I graduated, that's why I decided to go into this job, to kind of give back into communities, and helping kids that are in my situation now kind of reminds me of my own childhood and all the trauma that I've been through. And it just feels good to give back to them, and knowing that I'm doing something for them. That's the same thing that someone did for me when I was in my time of need. So it feels good to pay back.
Thanks, Khatra. So the third, this is just an image. One of the things we did as part of this, trying to develop a critical consciousness, is we also work with the staff at the Preschool Promise program that CAIRO has, the CAIRO Academy, which is in the southeast. And we did these identity work with reuse materials, actually from sort of an adaptation of some work done by a recently graduated doctoral student, Michelle Aldama. So anyway, the third one is roles and expertise of cultural navigation. So this is sort of like, people tend to throw this term around of a cultural navigator, or they'll say cultural broker, but it's very hard in the literature to find anyone who actually says what do these people do, other than there's someone who's from the same community. What is the expertise that's involved in it? And we found that from the cultural navigator's voice was that there was this incredible intercultural translation happening between systems and cultures that's really complex and overwhelming. And in fact, we came to the end to say it's an impossible task. We're trying to build a bridge from the families and communities to the schools, but unless the schools are willing to pull from that bridge, you know, not go on a different bridge, which is what often happens, but actually see that bridge and help it come into the school, then it's a really overwhelming task. There's so much to deal with in terms of holding knowledge, interpreting, and understanding. And there's a lot of, again, this tension between what the CNs are seeing the schools want, you know, what they want from the families and communities, and what they know the community and family needs, and what they're capable of. So they feel stuck in the middle of this in some ways. So it's sort of, what is this boundary between being a so-called professional and a community member is an artificial one. And so there's a lot of expertise, identification of special needs, and what are the related service, language, translation issues, and so on. Went on, and I think Khatra has a story here.
One of the examples that we found, and we a lot of the also the other cultural navigators had a problem with, is simple as making eye contact. So a lot of the kids that we work with are newcomers, and they go to school, the teacher's talking to them, the kids look down, and the teacher takes it as, oh, this child is really not listening, they're being disrespectful. But it's the opposite. A lot of the kids from Africa, you're taught that when there's an adult person talking to you, your teachers, your parents, you actually look down. So by them looking down, it's like they're giving you respect, not that they're like, oh, I don't care, they're going on and on. So that's some of the things that we have talked to the teachers about. Like, they're not doing it out of disrespect, they're actually doing it to show you respect, that, you know, this is my culture, and that's what we're taught. Like, when someone is talking to you, they're an adult, you actually look down to show them that you're respecting them and that you're actually listening, and that we're not supposed to make eye contact with them, which is different than in school, because you're like, the teacher's like, look into my eyes, are you listening, are you looking at me? And it's like the kid is like, they just look down, and it was a lot of struggle, but I think we're finally getting the hang of it. And it's actually pretty good for the teachers to be understanding too, that it's the kids' culture, and they don't mean it out of any disrespect, but it's actually they're showing that's how they show respect in their culture and their own way. So
thanks. And then the final theme here, which is basically the difficulty in supporting families to identify their own wealth. Here we're trying to do a cultural wealth model. The first place we started from was actually the cultural navigators beginning to get out of this deficit view of things that's so strong, this strong narrative that you're coming in to fix the problem, and so therefore you're going to focus on the problem, when in fact they need to draw back and focus on the strength and the wealth. And so then getting the families, because of cultural issues, to really think in terms of wealth was really difficult. And that's the next
Oh, what do we need in our practice is to draw on family assets. It's a challenge to identify strengths. Self-identifying a strength might be cultural challenge. The value of family strength or cultural wealth are not valued, and then families do not see or learn not to value their strengths.
Yeah, so as you can see, the cultural navigators, I think they found the asset, I mean the eco mapping really valuable. So I've done a lot of thinking about the impact, and because I work closely with the cultural navigators, I talk to them ongoing and see kind of how they're responding and interacting with the schools, and it's become really clear to me that they are becoming incredibly skilled at articulating the needs of families using a cultural wealth frame. So rather than allowing the conversation to continue on about all the problems that the family's having and what are we going to do, and they're able to reframe it and say, okay, these are the things that this family brings. Let's talk about that as well. The schools more and more, we're in the Beaverton School District, the Reynolds School District, and then IRCO has some, they're developing capacity to be in the David Douglas School District and have families in PPS as well. And so the schools are starting to look to us and ask questions, and the challenge for us is making sure that it's not just about them calling on our cultural navigators to solve the problems and fix things for kids, but that we are also being called to, like, how can we shift the culture in this room? How can we shift the ways that we're approaching these families? And so that is the big task for us this year, I think, is not letting ourselves get drawn into that so fully that the schools let go of all responsibility. Teachers are becoming, not teachers, the cultural navigators are becoming much more outspoken, and including our preschool teachers benefited a lot from doing a lot of professional development that was focused on culturally responsive classrooms and supporting the teachers. It's been very difficult, as many of you know, to find the qualified lead and assistant teachers who are from the Somali or African community. It's something that we're working on actively to do that, build that capacity. But the two women that we have as aides are now very outspoken. I don't know that you would necessarily know that they're aides in our classroom because we've put so much emphasis on, you can do this, you're capable, and yes, maybe you don't have the number of classes you need, but we expect that you provide equal, contributions to the children's curriculum and input about why we should or shouldn't do things a certain way. Yeah, and I guess that the cultural navigators as well are just very outspoken with teachers and administrators about what they're seeing. And one of the things that one of the cultural navigators came up with was that she really wanted to do seminars in our staff meeting. So as this grant wrapped up and we were sort of thinking next steps and things, we decided that it might be a good idea to, rather than even doing the work with the PSU, that the cultural navigators themselves would develop a theme and come to our staff meetings and present to other cultural navigators and facilitate a dialogue. So I think those are all just amazing outcomes that I've been just very proud of, the staff and what they're doing and what they're interested in doing. And with that, questions?
Yeah. Do we have some clarifying questions for the last folks who spoke to us?
So we do a lot of our parent education programs in partnership with our elementary schools. And oftentimes we're having concurrent classes, one in English and one in Spanish because of our high Latino population. And oftentimes our parent educators find themselves in a de facto community navigator role from that Hispanic community. Do you have any advice on things that they could do to be more effective as they try to explain to the school some of the concerns they're hearing from families.
Well, I think one of the shifts that we have made is, so even when we do our parent work at CAIRO, we're very focused on it being participatory as well. So rather than coming in and doing a parent education, it's driven much more by the parents. I don't know if this answers your question so much, but that also means that we're looking to the people who are doing, rather than doing translation, we have someone who is actively engaged in the process of the facilitation itself, and drawing out from their own experience, but also the parents' experience. So there may be a topic that we're covering. It might be, you know, looking at individual education plans or the policies and procedures in the schools, but we're drawing on the parents themselves to share what they know and then filling in the gaps. You know, so sort of leveling the hierarchy a little bit more so that it doesn't feel like it's one or the other. Instead, we're all here learning in this community together. And I'm wondering, like, that seems so like such an important role. Were schools able to provide opportunities, like regular sort of systematic opportunities for navigators to talk with staff, or how did that work? In all ways. And I might, if you have anything to say, Maxwell, too. Maxwell's here also. He's the program manager. But I think, number one, CAIRO has only been in the schools. This is our second full year, right? Second full year. And within that time, the teachers are looking at us informally. Like, they're like, how do I get access to Khatra? How do I get access to Maxwell? And they know, they can recognize how we are able to impact really intense situations in a much different way. So they're accessing them, but then also they're beginning to ask for professional development. However, it's hard. They don't ever have the time to do it. So like district-wide, we've tried to get professional development. So we've gotten a few opportunities, but they fill the calendar really early, and it's all very, they're things they have to cover. But then individual schools are starting to say, okay, we'd like you to come to the staff meeting or faculty, you know, and talk to teachers during this time. I think that they're getting to the point now where they're like, we've got to figure out a way to fit this in, because teachers are unprepared. Teachers feel unprepared for the students that are coming into the classroom, and they need people who can inform them from a very, very real experience, personal experience, rather than me coming in and saying, this is what I know about the African community.
I mean, I think part of the trick is that the schools are being genuine and authentic about it, not like come in and give us the required information, but rather having professional experiences that are more participatory, where we're really trying to understand things like bias and power and figure out the solution together. So one of the things that, I mean, this is where this project has led to is now we feel really ready to really engage the schools more in a more powerful way. The cultural navigators bring their power. And I think that part of this model is that there needs to be at least one person at the school who is ready to be the point person and really make it happen there, rather than it being, okay, we're going to deliver an hour of professional development, and then you can check that box and on you go.
Yes, they do, and we're developing how they view it. I mean, one of the things I was going to say is that sometimes what they're asking for is, can you come and give us a workshop on Somali culture? And I've reached a point where I will say back to them, we can share some stuff about Somali culture, but really we want you to know how to interact with all immigrants. And so that takes a paradigm shift, and it takes a shift in the schools. And Reynolds School District, Reynolds has made some contribution. ODE made a major contribution. So this year we got a much bigger grant from ODE, and we've added a cultural navigator that's specifically focused on early childhood. So this person will be going into preschools, and they will be supporting the development of an additional preschool. They will be working with the K3 kids in the schools that we're in already, and working more closely with parents. So ODE has school districts we're still working on, other than Reynolds has started to show some, they're going in that direction, just not very much.
Other specific questions for these panelists?
Well, quite honestly, we have more of an approach than a model. So I would say that each cultural navigator's experience of each school is a little different. So we have cultural navigators who are in the high school and middle schools, and then we have cultural navigators in the elementary schools. The Reynolds School District is very different from Beaverton School District. So the strategies we use, the approaches that we take are different. So some of it is about developing those conversations with we also maintain a close relationship with someone, at least. It's usually the principal or vice principal in any of the schools, to keep checking in, going back, talking. In Washington County, we have a very close relationship with a collaborative team. And that was the good thing about ODE, is they wanted us to, good and bad, they wanted us to work in collaboratives of all sorts of people from throughout the community, and it was good. I think the second round has sort of diminished that, the emphasis on that, in the ways that they funded it. But we have a really strong working relationship with children, youth, what is it, at the CYF, and then also the libraries and people within the district. But I would say for us, I think that people are really interested in what we're doing, and we have gotten funding to do it. And I think for us, we need to kind of build our capacity internally to maintain all of the demand, quite honestly. Do you have any thoughts about what the schools should have in place, Khatra, that's helpful? We also have developed a little flyer for schools about how to engage in a culturally responsive way, to sort of try to help the schools think about how they're approaching our cultural navigators, because we want them to be approaching our cultural navigators with respect and making the effort on their side to be welcoming, noticing when they're being biased, not just towards the students, but towards our cultural navigators.
I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the preschool teachers' identity work, knowing that a lot of folks here are from early childhood. I thought they might be interested in what that actually looks like, and what the benefits are that you see of that, especially given the fact that the workforce, we've got that gap space, but we're trying to bring potentially over, the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of different folks into the workforce, and how important that identity work might be for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that came in the context of it being a multicultural team, where you had 2 of the teachers who were white and 2 who were from Somali background. And so in working with it, part of the grant was I was working with them as a consultant or whatever was really trying to create a team approach where everyone had something to bring to the table. And so that's why we did the identity work there, was to realize, to be able to talk about what their experiences were, whether that was, you know, how did you get here? The immigrant experience may be very different from other folks, and to talk about social class. So there was some discussion around that, but it was also part of, you know, if I was taking documentation of the classroom and we're having a dialogue, was what did each person have to understanding what that was. And then when we did some professional development, that particular activity you saw was they were using reuse materials. There's a center at the Helen Gordon Center, which is the lab school for Portland State, called the Ramita Center, and they do workshops with teachers. And so we went in there. And so they were actually, in that one, they were creating identity portraits of a partner. And so those partners were someone who was Somali and someone who was white. And then talking about what they saw in that construction of each other, because that's a very risky thing to do. But this was a group of people who had been teaching together for 3 or 4 or 5 months. So they developed a sense of community. So we thought that there was time to sort of open that up so that that could be part of the dialogue, because otherwise you get stuck in talking about curriculum and systems and things, and you don't get to the real things that are underlying the problem about creating not just culturally responsive classrooms, but culturally sustaining classrooms, you know, that are more dynamic. So
I would just add that in my work interculturally and lots of conversations with people from within the African community, one of the things that I hear often is, you know, that there's a sense that Americans don't see them fully. You know, it's sort of like there's a kind of a glossed over your other, you know, and it's challenging sometimes for people to really look deeply into the eyes and really know the other person who speaks a different language or comes from a very different culture or even just looks different. And so there's sort of there's a lack of transparency somehow. And so this, I think the identity development, particularly this intercultural identity development, gave them an opportunity to show, I see you fully. I can, when they created their image of the other person, their comments were, you know, the joy that emanates from your eyes, the sparkle, you know, the way you smile so fully with kids, you know, the comments like that, they were very powerful and thoughtful, and it made, I think it made for those teachers, particularly for the Somali teachers, but I think it went both ways, that these other teachers saw them and respected them fully. And I think those, giving people those opportunities to go deep, and I think that the other, you know, given the different ways to see each other, I think is really important. Like the eco mapping also was a different way of seeing inside of a situation, and this is a different way of seeing inside one another and sharing that fully.
Well, we have a little bit of time still left if for sort of any questions of any of the panelists. If things have come up for you that you know, we all process at different speeds that you might have heard Beth or Ann talk about, or our other presenters talk about that you'd like to ask about. So I'll pause there to see any other questions or thoughts or comments that are coming up for folks as you sort of resonate with the information that's been shared. Can we get a microphone? How might we? How might we? I'd be interested to hear the thoughts of the folks on the panel, honestly.
I will say that some of the funding we got from ODE is to support two people from within the community to pursue early childhood for education. It's not a ton of money, but it's a start. And then we also have a preschool promise capacity building grant with one of our aides is actually on a track to get her degree. Khatra is also on a track. So we're finding CAIRO is really putting a lot of energy into, we hire people with the intention that these are people who should have access to additional training, whether it's in-house or in a PSU or other programs. And then other people can probably talk about this more, but I think that there's also a lot of funding that is coming in that is going to be geared towards that. I think that there's a lot of money coming into early childhood period, right? We're trying to create preschool for all. And I think in general, we've got a shortage of teachers. So.
I also wondered, Pam, I know there's some really innovative things happening around trying to increase opportunities for culturally and linguistically diverse providers to have access to more and better quality trainings offered by people who reflect those cultures. And did you want to maybe talk a little bit about the Growing Master Trainers Project, which is one that we're helping to evaluate. It's funded by the Early Childhood Funders Circle. Robin is also involved in that. And I think it's, these are the kinds of things, there has to be new ways of getting providers onto those pathways to become credentialed and certified. Put you on the spot, right?
Although, and actually, I just want you to know, I'm from the But the Going Master Training Project, we're looking into the programs that we have, support folks from the community who are workable, or people who are doing here already, and who do their community secondary schools to the business. So I think that we also and so we can get training translated, very expensive, but then it comes from culture, right? English-speaking culture, and then we get so our idea with that is that we take, we work with cohorts in the communities or from the community-based organization that they have identified, and we support them to develop trainings from the community, from their culture, from their language, and then we share that across. So it's been an interesting project. Whole first year was just sort of a little storming as all these diverse folks come together to try to figure out where we are going, because Center for Career Development went into the project as co-creator versus, hey, we're bringing out our training program. We want you to be part of it. Of course, we did want that, but we were going in as co-creators, so there was lots of stuff that happened first. But it's very exciting. And we've got we're working with IRCO, and we got a group of trainers there. It's very exciting. We're working with Latino Network and Albina Head Start, and we have a group in Malheur County, in the Gorge area, in Southern Oregon, I mean, all over. So we're working on some stuff. Hopefully, we'll be back next year to share some data. Okay?
I appreciated the last question and the way the conversation is being developed, and I actually have the microphone, and I'm going to get on a soapbox instead of ask a question. which is to say that there are a lot of people here in this room who have the ability to transform not just what's happening here in actual programs and services, but in higher education delivery. That there's a lot of work that needs to be done there in order to transform those systems so that we can get to the kind of workforce that we want to see. And so whether it's this event or the Grand Articulation Summit or other events where higher education is coming together, we have a lot of work to do there.
So I'm from OSU, and I just want to say, and I don't want to let it pass without saying this, I just came from a 3-day Oregon Head Start Association conference in Redmond, and unless teacher salaries are raised, all of this good work of talking about getting a workforce and educating them and giving them the training they need, we're not going to be able to retain them unless we're going to pay them what they are due. Oregon Head Start, the directors all say that they have new teachers come in and they train them and they leave us because they're not being paid what they should be paid. We have students who do 4 years of human development and early childhood education with us. They come into the final year and they do a practicum with me, which is a 12-credit class. They don't think they want to go into early childhood. They then say, oh, yes, we do. We want to. We love it. And the number one comment they make is, but there's no money in it. So unless salaries are raised and we start putting money into that and investing in the teachers, we're not going to be able to retain.
I think what's coming up for me as people are talking is that we're talking about a very complex problem that has a lot of causes and is going to take a lot of different kinds of strategies to resolve. You know, there's the immediate needs of making sure that we have access to training that's meaningful and useful and actually helps people in their daily practice now. There's the higher education pre-service preparation that absolutely needs to be transformed. We did focus groups with teachers in child care centers this summer, and unfortunately some of the stories we heard from the Latinx teachers made people cry at ELD as to how they were treated by higher education, how often they were discouraged from pursuing degrees, for example, being one thing. So we've got, to me, a lot of mindsets operating here. That's been a theme kind of across many of what we've talked about here. We've got a lot of unwritten policies that actually are one of the strongest things that drives behavior in systems, like just how we do things around here, that absolutely need to be shifted. So it's very heartening to have a room full of people like this who really understand that and know that we really have to get a much more aligned and synergistic approach to these problems if we really want to make the kind of change that I think all of us are committed to for children and families and providers and teachers and directors, et cetera. Or comment that you want to share?
No, actually, I mean, I'm really valuing this conversation because I think that it is a large paradigm shift that would need to happen, and you have to figure out how to move not just one battleship and turn it around very slowly, but a whole fleet. Thank you. I was losing my nautical knowledge right there, but you need to move the whole fleet in a way where they're not bumping into each other and that we're eventually all going in the same direction. Which is very challenging. So that's why these opportunities are so great to see where there's places where we can align and steer together. And one of the little things that I was thinking about is one thing that stood out to me, Beth, in some of your findings is, and we knew this, we've known this from some other informal questioning that we've asked, is the main curriculum being used in that program is creative curriculum. And really starting to say, okay, well, if that is what people are using and considering their foundation and they feel it is culturally responsive, how do we make that shift? Because I think we can all agree, without getting into the details, that there's a gap between what you guys are doing around authentic, culturally responsive education, care, community building, and what creative curriculum is saying about what pictures to put on your wall. So I'm wondering, I was curious then, like, okay, so is there an opportunity here? Is there an opportunity to say, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and where you guys might think or advise around how to start moving in some directions?
I'm really glad. I'm really glad you said that, because as soon as I thought, what did we mean by curriculum when I saw the data? It means a published curriculum, which is problematic when we're saying that the curriculum should come from the community and the culture, and saying that the teachers in that classroom and the members of the community are the experts. They should have more of the decision-making power about it. And so I think we really have to break down this dependence on saying you can only have quality if you use a published curriculum. That's the first thing I say, and giving much more belief in the capacity of early childhood educators to know their community and to be able to develop curriculum. You know, I'm not saying you don't have a plan or you don't have those sort of things, but to change that a little bit. I know at the Preschool Promise at CAIRO, one of the things in the quality rating system that they were nicked on was that they didn't show enough diversity on the walls or something, which was just the most ridiculous thing in the world. If you go into that community, it's dripping with that community in terms of a culturally specific program. But because it didn't match whatever that was, it was a problem. And so I think we have to look at systems of deciding on what is quality, systems of deciding about what is curriculum, and really unpack those a bit, because they're often the things that get in the way, unfortunately. And when the teachers who are saying they decided they were culturally responsive, of course, we don't know what that really means, right? It could be a very superficial tourist curriculum that they're thinking is culturally responsive, when cultural responsiveness is much more, it's a really deep value. It's really deep value in the relationships, I think.
We're all supposed to be culturally responsive. So do you answer? Yes, of course we're culturally responsive.
Thank you all so much. I think bringing up all of the issues that were brought up in the audience, thank you. Please remember that we will send, and for the people online too that have joined us, we do have a nice group online, so thank you for being here too. We will be sending around contact information. If you don't want your contact information shared, let me know soon. But otherwise, I'm going to put it up, because I think, like, we need to continue these conversations and know now that there's resources and people with different interests and capacities. And so thank you very much. It is lunchtime. It's lovely outside. I don't know if you haven't been to this building. The lunch is served out in the hallway here, and then there's a beautiful view and courtyard outside. I don't know how cold it is, but please enjoy it. It's gorgeous. We do have until 1 o'clock for lunch. However, we will come back around 12:30-ish, maybe 12:35, to go through. In your packets, you have a clipped together stapled sharing tool is what it's called. And this is a time for folks who have submitted something to talk about projects that are ongoing or have just completed or just starting up. And so we'll be gathering back to talk through that. I understand that you have a lot going on, and so, or if you're outside and you're like, I can't go back in yet. I understand. I might give you some like guilty looks from inside, but no problem. But please come back in here. It'll be an informal share, so just a couple minutes to talk and another chance, and then we'll go into the afternoon. So thank you so much. Please enjoy lunch. Let me know if you need anything. We do have some extra. We can help if anyone needs space for if they need to make a phone call or that kind of thing. Let me know. Thank you so much.